Hey guys, I'm not sure how to start this. I've read a lot of posts, never thinking I'd be the one writing one, but life has a way of blindsiding you. I guess I need to get this off my chest, so here it goes. I've been married to Laura for 10 years. We live in a small town in Texas just outside of Austin. I always thought we had a good marriage. Not perfect, of course, but solid. We have two kids, Mia, who's 8, and Jack, who just turned 5. Life was busy, but good. I work as a mechanic at a local garage, and Laura has an office job as a project manager at a mid sized company in the city. She's always been sharp, confident, and someone who knows how to take charge. For years, I trusted her completely. She was my partner in everything, and we had each other's backs. But about 6 months ago, I started noticing changes, little things at first. She always had her phone with her, like always. Even at night, it was either in her hand or on her side of the bed, locked tight. If it buzzed, she'd glance at it quickly and put it down, acting like nothing happened. At first, I didn't think much of it. Everyone's attached to their phones these days, right? But then she started staying late at work more often. She'd text me saying she had urgent deadlines or last minute meetings and wouldn't be home until well past dinner. Sometimes, when she did come home, she'd barely talk to me, just go straight to bed, claiming she was exhausted. The distance between us grew. Laura had always been someone who loved to share the little details of her day, but now she was quiet, vague. I'd ask how work was going, and she'd just shrug and say, same old. She seemed distracted, like her mind was somewhere else. When I'd bring it up, she'd laugh it off, calling me paranoid. At first, I ignored it, convincing myself I was imagining things. Maybe she really was just busy. Maybe I was reading too much into it. But that nagging feeling, the one that gnaws at the back of your mind and won't let go, it was there. And it was only getting louder. I didn't want to believe something was wrong. Laura was my wife, the mother of my kids. We'd been through so much together. Moving to Texas, raising a family, navigating all the ups and downs of life. But the more I tried to brush off my suspicions, the more they clawed their way back to the surface. Something wasn't right. And I was about to find out just how wrong I was. A couple of weeks after I first started noticing the changes in Laura, something happened that I couldn't ignore. It was a regular Tuesday evening. Laura had come home late again, claiming she'd had back to back meetings at work. She barely said a word during dinner, just picked at her food while scrolling on her phone. Afterward, she went straight to the shower, leaving her phone on the kitchen counter. Never happened. She always had her phone with her. Always. I don't know what came over me, but I felt this weird urge to check it. Maybe I was looking for reassurance, something to prove I was just being paranoid. I told myself I wouldn't snoop, I'd just see if there was anything unusual, like a weird notification or a text from a coworker. But then, as I picked up her phone, the screen lit up, and there it was, a message from someone named David. It was short, just, "Hi, how are you?" At first glance, it seemed innocent enough, but something about it made my stomach drop. I didn't recognize the name, and it wasn't like Laura to have casual conversations with anyone outside of work or family. Still, I tried to brush it off. Maybe he was a coworker, maybe it was nothing. But as I put her phone back down, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't nothing. When she came out of the shower, I casually asked her about her day, trying to act normal. "Work must be crazy," I said. "You've been staying late a lot." She shrugged, toweling her hair. "Yeah, it's been hectic. Big projects, tight deadlines. You know how it is." I nodded, watching her carefully. "Who's David?" I asked, as casually as I could. She froze for half a second, just long enough to notice, before quickly recovering. "David? Oh, he's just the new guy on the team. I've been helping him get up to speed." Her answer sounded reasonable, but the way she said it felt off. Too quick, too rehearsed. And that half-second pause stuck with me. For the rest of the night, I couldn't get the message out of my head. "Hi, how are you?" was so simple, but it felt like the tip of an iceberg. Like there was a whole lot more beneath the surface that I wasn't seeing. I decided then and there that I needed to pay more attention. Maybe I was overreacting, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. And if there was one thing I knew, it was that feelings like this don't just come out of nowhere. After seeing that message from David, I couldn't let it go. Something about it nagged at me, like an itch I couldn't scratch. I decided I needed to pay closer attention to Laura's behavior to see if my gut feeling was right or if I was just being paranoid. Over the next few days, I started noticing things I hadn't before, or maybe things I didn't want to notice. For starters, Laura was glued to her phone more than ever. She'd smile while reading something, her face lighting up in a way I hadn't seen in months. But whenever I asked her what was so funny or interesting, she'd brush it off. Just work stuff, she'd say. Or, a dumb meme, you wouldn't get it. Her mood swings were another red flag. Some days she'd come home in a great mood, chatty, laughing, even playful with the kids. Other days she seemed distant, lost in her own world. It was like living with two different people. And I never knew which version of her I was going to get. I started asking more questions, trying to figure out what was going on. How's work? I'd ask casually over dinner. Anything interesting happened today? Her answers were always the same, vague and generic. Oh, just meetings and deadlines, nothing exciting. It felt like she was keeping me at arm's length, giving me just enough information to stop me from asking more. Then there was the way she was dressing. Laura had always taken pride in her appearance, but lately she'd stepped it up a notch. She was wearing new clothes, tighter dresses, higher heels, makeup that made her look like she was going to a photo shoot instead of the office. At first, I thought maybe she was just trying to boost her confidence, but now I wasn't so sure. It felt like she was dressing up for someone. And one night, after the kids were in bed, tried to bring it up. You've been dressing up a lot lately, I said, trying to keep my tone light. Anything special going on at work? She rolled her eyes, an edge creeping into her voice. Mark, do I need a reason to look nice? Can't I just want to feel good about myself? Her reaction caught me off guard. It wasn't like I had accused her of anything, but she acted like I had. I decided to back off for the time being, but the interaction only made my suspicions grow stronger. By the end of the week, I felt like I was living with a stranger. Laura was still my wife, still the mother of my kids, but there was a part of her life that she was keeping hidden from me, and I was determined to find out what it was. It happened late one night, a few days after our tense conversation about her dressing up. Laura had fallen asleep early, her phone sitting on the nightstand next to her. Normally it would have been in her hand or tucked under her pillow, but tonight, for whatever reason, she hadn't bothered to hide it. I stared at the phone, the room silent except for the sound of her breathing. My heart was racing, my mind spinning. I told myself I wouldn't be the kind of person who snoops through their spouse's things, but at that moment, I felt like I had no choice. I needed answers. Carefully, I reached over and picked up her phone. The screen was locked, of course, but I knew her passcode. It hadn't changed. My fingers trembled as I typed it in, half expecting her to wake up at any moment. When the screen unlocked, I felt a wave of guilt and relief all at once. I started with her messages. Most of them were harmless. Chats with friends, co-workers, even a group text about PTA meetings. But then I found the thread with David. At first, it seemed normal. The most recent messages were cautious and professional. Nothing that would raise suspicion. But as I scrolled further back, the tone began to change. There were inside jokes, playful banter, and phrases that felt way too intimate for a colleague. Then I saw, "You looked amazing today. I couldn't stop thinking about you." And her reply, "You're too sweet. Don't make me blush." My stomach turned. It wasn't outright sexual, but it was clear this was more than just friendship. I kept scrolling, my chest tightening with every message. Finally, I found a photo. It was taken at a restaurant, one I didn't recognize. Laura and David were sitting side by side, their heads close together, smiling for the camera. Her hand was resting on his arm. I felt a chill run through my body. There was no way to misinterpret this. It wasn't just a work thing, and it definitely wasn't innocent. I put the phone back exactly where I had found it, my hands shaking. For the rest of the night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut, like the life I thought I had was slipping through my fingers. Part of me wanted to wake her up right then and there, to demand an explanation. But another part of me wasn't ready. Not yet. I needed more proof. I needed to be absolutely sure before I confronted her. And I needed to figure out what the hell I was going to do about it. The next evening, I couldn't hold it in anymore. All day at work, my mind had been racing. Every time I thought about those messages, That photo of her and David. My chest tightened. I didn't know how to process the betrayal I felt, and the only way I was going to get any answers was by confronting her. After the kids went to bed, I found Laura in the living room, scrolling through her phone. Oh, she looked up and smiled at me, but it felt forced. Like she knew something was coming. I sat down across from her, my heart pounding in my chest. "Who's David?" I asked, keeping my voice as calm as I could manage. Her smile faltered for a split second, but she quickly recovered. "David? He's a colleague. I told you about him, remember? He's new on my team." I nodded, studying her face. "Yeah, you mentioned him. But why is he texting you so much? And why are you meeting him for dinner outside of work?" Her eyes widened, and for a moment I thought I had her. But then she leaned back, crossing her arms. "Mark, are you seriously accusing me of something? I've been mentoring him, that's all. He's going through a tough time, and I've been helping him adjust to the new role." Her tone was calm, even a little annoyed. And for a second, I started to doubt myself. Was I reading too much into this? But then I thought about the messages, the photo, and the way she'd been acting lately. "I saw the photo, Laura," I said quietly. "The one of you two at the restaurant." Her face froze, and I knew I'd hit a nerve. But she recovered quickly, rolling her eyes. "Oh, that? We grabbed a quick dinner after a meeting. I didn't think I needed to clear every single thing I do with you. Are we really doing this right now?" Her dismissive attitude made my blood boil. "Yes, we're doing this," I said, my voice rising, "because something isn't adding up, and you know it." She shook her head, standing up and pacing the room. "You're being ridiculous, Mark. You're paranoid. Just because I have a male coworker doesn't mean I'm cheating. Do you even hear yourself?" I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted so badly to believe her. But the evidence was there, staring me in the face. And the way she was deflecting, turning it back on me, it only made me more suspicious. "I'm not paranoid," I said firmly. "I'm your husband, and I deserve the truth." She stopped pacing and looked at me, her expression hard. "The truth is, you're overreacting. There's nothing going on, and I'm not going to sit here and defend myself over something that doesn't exist." With that, she stormed out of the room, leaving me sitting there, stunned and furious. I knew she was lying, but without more proof, I couldn't make her admit it. And part of me wasn't sure I was ready to hear the full truth anyway. That night, I lay awake, wondering how the hell we'd gotten to this point. The woman I'd loved, trusted, and built a life with was hiding something from me, and no matter how much I tried to push it aside, I couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in my gut. I knew I couldn't do this alone. I needed help. After the blow-up with Laura, I knew I couldn't figure this out on my own. Every time I replayed her dismissive tone, her refusal to take my questions seriously, my frustration grew. I needed proof. Solid, undeniable proof, and I knew just the person to help me get it. My best friend Alex is one of those guys who knows his way around tech. He works in IT, and over the years, he's helped me with everything from setting up my work laptop to recovering files I thought were lost forever. If anyone could help me get to the bottom of this, it was him. We met up that weekend at his house. His wife was out running errands, so it was just the two of us sitting on his back porch with a couple of beers. I told him everything: how Laura had been acting, the messages from David, the photo, and her refusal to give me a straight answer. Alex listened quietly, nodding every now and then. When I finished, he set his beer down and leaned forward. "Look, man, I'm sorry you're dealing with this," he said, "but if she's lying, we'll figure it out." "How?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. "She's being so careful. I don't know how to get through to her." Alex thought for a moment, then asked, "Does she delete her messages?" I nodded. "Yeah, I checked her phone a few nights ago, and the thread with David was clean. She's cautious." A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Not cautious enough. Messages might be gone from her phone, but if they were sent recently, there's a good chance I can recover them." My heart skipped a beat. "You can do that?" He shrugged. "It's not exactly legal, but it's not like I'm hacking into her phone. I'll just use recovery software. But you'll need to get me her phone for an hour or so." That was the tricky part. Laura was glued to her phone. The only time she wasn't holding it was when she was asleep, and even then, it was right next to her. But I was desperate, and I told Alex I'd figure out a way. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. That night, Laura had a few glasses of wine with dinner, more than usual. By the time we went to bed, she was out cold, her phone sitting on the nightstand. My hands trembled as I picked it up, slipped into the living room, and drove it to Alex's house. He was waiting for me, and we got to work immediately. Watching him recover the deleted messages was nerve-wracking. Every second felt like an eternity. But when the messages finally started populating on the screen, my stomach dropped. The texts were worse than I'd imagined. David wasn't just some flirty coworker. He was full-on professing his love for Laura. He called her his sweetheart, told her she was the most beautiful woman he'd ever known, and even suggested they run away together for a weekend. My chest tightened as I read her replies. She didn't outright say she loved him back, but her responses were playful, encouraging. She wasn't shutting him down. She was feeding into it. And then there was the clincher. Last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about it. I felt like I was going to throw up. There was no denying it now. Laura was having an affair, and she'd been lying to my face about it the entire time. Alex looked at me, his expression serious. I'm sorry, man. I know this isn't what you wanted to find. I shook my head, trying to process what I'd just seen. No, it's what I needed to find. I can't keep living like this. I took her phone back home, placed it carefully on the nightstand, and climbed into bed next to her. She stirred slightly, but didn't wake up. I lay there in the dark, my mind racing. I had the proof I needed, but now I had to decide what to do with it. The next morning, I woke up before Laura, my mind still reeling from what Alex had uncovered. As I watched her sleep, I couldn't help but feel a mix of anger, sadness, and betrayal. This was the woman I'd built my life with, the mother of my children, and she'd been lying to me for God knows how long. I went through my morning routine on autopilot, trying to act normal. Laura seemed completely oblivious, sipping her coffee and chatting with the kids, like it was any other day. But I couldn't look at her the same way. Every smile she gave me felt fake. Every word she spoke sounded hollow. That evening, after we put the kids to bed, I decided it was time to confront her. I couldn't keep this bottled up any longer. I walked into the living room, where she was scrolling through her phone, and asked her to sit down. "What's this about?" she asked, glancing up at me with mild annoyance. "We need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "About you and David." Her face froze for a split second before she quickly recovered. "Mark, we've been over this. There's nothing going on. He's just a colleague." I shook my head, pulling out my phone. Don't lie to me, Laura. I know the truth." Her eyes darted to the screen as I opened the folder of screenshots Alex had helped me recover. I handed her the phone, showing her the messages. The ones where David called her sweetheart, the one about last night, and the one where he suggested they run away together. Her face turned pale as she scrolled through them, her hand trembling. Where did you get these?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It doesn't matter," I said, my anger bubbling to the surface. "What matters is that I know. I know you've been lying to me. I know you've been sneaking around with him. And I know this wasn't just some harmless friendship." She set the phone down, her expression shifting from shock to defensiveness. "It's not what you think," she said, crossing her arms. "David and it's complicated. He's been going through a rough time, and I was just trying to be there for him." "Stop," I said sharply. "Don't insult my intelligence." "I saw the messages, Laura. I saw the one where he said, 'Last night was incredible.'" "What does that mean, huh? Were you just comforting him in his bed?" Her face turned red, and for a moment she looked like she might deny it. But then she sighed, slumping back in her chair. "Fine," she said, her tone bitter. "Yes, we slept together. Are you happy now? Is that what you wanted to hear?" The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Even though I had already known the truth, hearing her admit it made it all too real. My hands clenched into fists at my sides as I struggled to keep my composure. "Why?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Why would you do this to me, to us?" She shrugged, avoiding my gaze. "I don't know, Mark. Maybe because I was bored. Maybe because I felt like you stopped paying attention to me. Or maybe I just wanted to feel something different for once." Her words stung like daggers. There was no apology, no remorse, just excuses. It was like she didn't even care about the damage she'd caused. I stood up, unable to look at her any longer. "You need to leave," I said, my voice shaking. "Pack a bag and go stay with your sister. I can't deal with this right now." "Seriously?" she scoffed. "You're just going to throw me out like that?" You threw us out the moment you decided to cheat, I shot back. Now get out. She stared at me for a moment, her expression defiant, before finally storming off to the bedroom to pack. As I watched her go, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. This wasn't how I'd ever imagined our marriage would end, but at least now I knew the truth. Laura left that night, slamming the door behind her as she drove off to her sister's house. The silence that followed felt deafening. I sat on the couch staring at nothing, the weight of everything crashing down on me. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the sheer audacity of her excuses. The way she tried to pin the blame on me, as if I'd driven her to this. The next day, I called my best friend Alex. He'd been there for me through this whole thing, and I needed his level head to keep me grounded. We met up at our usual spot, a hole-in-the-wall diner where we could talk without interruptions. Over greasy burgers and bad coffee, I laid it all out for him. She admitted it, I said, my voice flat. She finally came clean, said it was about feeling something different. Like that makes it okay. Alex shook his head, his face a mix of anger and sympathy. Man, I'm so sorry. I was hoping maybe she'd own up and at least try to make it right, but it sounds like she's just doubling down. She's staying at her sister's now, I continued. I told her to leave. I couldn't look at her anymore. Good, Alex said firmly. You don't need that kind of toxicity in your life. But what about the kids? That was the hardest part. Me and Jack were too young to understand what was going on, and I didn't want to drag them into the mess. I haven't told them yet, I admitted. They think she's just visiting her sister. I don't know how I'm going to explain this to them. Alex nodded, his expression serious. Take your time. You don't have to have all the answers right now. Just focus on them and on yourself. That evening, I decided it was time to tell someone else. Laura's sister, Megan. She deserved to know why Laura was crashing at her place, and I figured she might be able to talk some sense into her. Megan and I had always gotten along, and I knew she wouldn't sugarcoat things. I called her after the kids were asleep, my heart pounding as I waited for her to pick up. Mark, is everything okay? She answered, her voice concerned. Not really, I admitted. Listen, I need to tell you something about Laura. Over the next 20 minutes, I explained everything. The messages, the photo, her admission. Megan was silent for most of it, but when I finished, she let out a long sigh. I can't believe she did this, she said finally. I mean, I knew she'd been distant lately, but I never thought, God, Mark, I'm so sorry. It's not your fault, I said. I just thought you should know. Maybe you can talk to her. Maybe you can see what she's... It's an addiction, I'll try, Megan promised. But you know how stubborn she is. If she doesn't want to hear it, there's not much I can do. After we hung up, I felt a strange sense of relief. At least now someone else knew the truth. I wasn't carrying the burden alone anymore. The next few days were a blur of emotions. Anger, sadness, even moments of numbness where I felt like I was just going through the motions. Laura texted me a few times, asking to talk, but I ignored her. I needed space to figure out what I wanted and how to move forward. Then, out of the blue, I got a message from Megan. We need to talk. Call me when you can. When I called her back, she sounded upset. Mark, I don't know how to tell you this, but Laura isn't being honest with you. She told me she ended things with David, but I don't think that's true. I saw a notification pop up on her phone when she wasn't looking. It was him. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. She's still talking to him? It looks like it, Megan said. I didn't say anything to her, but I thought you should know. That was it. The final nail in the coffin. Laura hadn't just betrayed me. She betrayed any chance we had of fixing things. And now, I knew what I had to do. Nay to do. Megan's call confirmed what I already knew deep down. There was no coming back from this. Laura's lies weren't just a one-time thing. They were a pattern, and I couldn't keep pretending that things could go back to the way they were. That night, as I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the divorce papers I'd printed out earlier that week, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. This wasn't the life I'd envisioned, but it was the one I had now, and I needed to take control of it. The next morning, I texted Laura, "We need to talk. Come by the house tonight after the kids are asleep." She replied quickly, "Okay, I'll be there." All day, I rehearsed what I wanted to say, but when she walked through the door that evening, everything flew out of my head. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. her usual confident demeanor replaced with something softer, almost vulnerable. For a moment, I felt a pang of sympathy, but then I remembered why we were here. "Thanks for coming," I said, keeping my tone as neutral as possible. She sat down across from me at the dining table, folding her hands nervously. "Mark, I. y-" I held up a hand to stop her. "Don't. Just listen for a minute." She nodded, biting her lip. "I've spent the last few weeks trying to figure out if I can forgive you," I began. "If we can fix this for the sake of the kids, for the sake of everything we've built together. But the truth is, I can't. I can't trust you anymore, Laura. And without trust, there's nothing left." Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't interrupt. "I know you said you ended things with David," I continued, "but Megan told me you're still talking to him. You couldn't even give me the decency of honesty after everything that's happened." Her face turned red and she opened her mouth to protest, but I cut her off. "Don't deny it. I don't care anymore. The point is, this marriage is over." Tears spilled down her cheeks as she stared at me, her hands trembling. "Mark, please," she said, her voice breaking. "I'll stop talking to him, I swear. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. Don't do this to us." "I'm not the one who did this, Laura," I said, my voice firm. "You made your choice when you lied to me, when you betrayed me, when you put our family at risk for some fling. I'm just dealing with the consequences." She broke down, sobbing into her hands. For a moment, I felt the urge to comfort her, but I stopped myself. This wasn't my job anymore. She'd made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. I slid the divorce papers across the table. "I've already spoken to a lawyer," I said. "This is a clean break, no mess, no drama. We'll share custody of the kids, and I'll keep the house. You can take whatever you need to start over." She stared at the papers, her sobs quieting as she realized I wasn't bluffing. "Mark," she whispered, "are you sure this is what you want?" "I'm sure," I said, my voice steady. "I deserve better than this. The kids deserve better than this." For the first time, she didn't argue. She just nodded, wiping her tears as she picked up the papers. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I know that doesn't mean much now, but I am. I'm so sorry." "I hope you are," I said, standing up, "because you've lost more than just me. You've lost the family we built together, and that's on you." She left shortly after, and as I watched her car disappear down the driveway, I felt a strange sense of closure. It wasn't happiness exactly, but it was something close to peace. I'd made my choice, and now it was time to move forward. It's been 6 months since Laura signed the divorce papers. The house feels different now. Quieter, lighter, like a weight has been lifted. At first, it was strange being here without her, especially on the nights when the kids were with her. The silence was deafening, and I'd catch myself wondering if I'd made the right choice. But over time, I realized that the peace I felt wasn't just in the house. It was in me. The divorce was finalized quickly, thanks to Laura agreeing to keep things amicable for the sake of the kids. We share custody with Emma and Jack, splitting their time between my house and the apartment Laura moved into downtown. Explaining the situation to them was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I kept it simple, telling them that Mommy and Daddy both loved them very much but couldn't live together anymore. They cried, of course, and it broke my heart, but I made a promise to myself that I'd do everything I could to make this transition easier for them. Since then, I've focused on rebuilding my life. I started going to the gym, something I hadn't done in years, and picked up an old hobby of woodworking. It's been therapeutic, spending hours in the garage, sanding and shaping pieces of wood into something new. It feels symbolic in a way, like I'm rebuilding myself along with the furniture. I've also reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in a long time. Alex has been a rock through all of this, always ready with a beer and a listening ear when I needed to vent. Even Megan has reached out a few times, checking in to see how I'm doing and offering to help with the kids when I need a break. Surprisingly, she's been one of my biggest supporters, and I can tell she's just as disappointed in Laura as I am. As for Laura, I hear bits and pieces about her life through the kids. She's still working in the same company, but David is no longer in the picture. At least that's what Megan told me. Whether that's true or not, I don't really care anymore. She's not my responsibility. We keep things civil for the sake of Emma and Jack, but that's where it ends. I don't ask about her life, and she doesn't ask about mine. The kids are doing better than I expected. They've adjusted to the new routine, and I make sure to spend as much quality time with them as I can. We've started a few traditions: Saturday morning pancakes, movie nights, trips to the park. It's not the family life I imagined, but it's ours, and I'm learning to be okay with that. Some nights when the house is quiet and the kids are asleep, I think about everything that's happened. Okay. The betrayal, the lies, the pain. It's all still there, like scars that haven't fully healed. But those moments are fewer and farther between now. Slowly, I'm letting go of the anger, replacing it with something that feels a little like acceptance. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe one day I'll start dating again, but for now, I'm happy focusing on myself and my kids. This experience has taught me a lot about who I am and what I deserve. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this: honesty and trust are everything. Without them, nothing else matters. Life goes on. It's not perfect and it never will be, but it's mine. And for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Tell me what you think about that story. Have a good day and bye.